Okay, Sarah Shannon, part two. Start the video cut off of my response to chapter reading nine in my STEM innovation class. Today is July 17, 2022. So I'm just going to jump in on part two. I was talking about basically just summary gist of the chapter they were reading, and then I'm going to talk about the takeaways from that chapter after I finish, and what the surprises and some things I want to talk about the chapter when I'm finished summary of what I already, in addition to what I already just summed up in part one of this. And so talking about the multidimensional aspects of the good things that have happened as we start thinking about scaling and stemming down and sustaining STEM innovations in our schools, and then some bad things that have happened that are multidimensional, not just one you can just point out, one problem over here, one problem over there. There's several different aspects that go into the good things about implementing STEM education, the good things in the process that we've made and the promises that we made and progress we've made, as well as some problems with that, one of them being actors and people that are in charge of implementing these STEM. That's what I was talking about. And so how it's important that leaders, motivate and inspire and ask people and help people to get excited about implementing these in our schools and our classes and our committees, and get the children excited and get the teachers excited, and those that are actually going to be using them in these libraries and museums and these science centers. That's very important, and I agree with that. That probably would have a large factorial result in why some of these things are successful and why they're not as successful. And then talking about historical institutions, programs and committees like the national, state, local level, and their efforts to really try, you hear programs and committees like the National Science Foundation and the Department of Education that have tried to implement more STEM educations in our classrooms and our schools, and the difficulties like what I just discussed can sometimes happen in implementing and getting these at a large scale level. So that's why we have to discuss the issues that are talked about in this text, and the solutions that are multidimensional, as well as some strategies we can use to try to solve these problems that are happening. And so and the importance of leadership, and continue to do, they talk about this in this chapter, continue to do studies on more innovations that we can use in addition to the ones we already talked about, as well as some more solutions to these problems that we are having, and trying to implement these a little bit more, and importance of using technology and other strategies to implement these programs. And then chapter 5 pointed out how much research is so important. Talking about that, we talked about that previously in the chapter, how it's important that when you're implementing these, just giving a review of how when you're implementing these programs, important of using research-based strategies and using innovations that's going to work and that are really going to be successful, so it won't be wasting taxpayers' monies and just starting these programs that are not really going to be effective and not going to give us the desired result that we want to have. So research-based, evidence-based strategies and programs that they've researched and they studied. We talked about that in a prior chapter when they did a study and a very detailed outline on how they would go about in choosing the programs that they use. And part of that was using research-based effective strategies in implementing that. And then also the National Science Foundation talked a little bit about how they implemented new generational standards. We talked about that previously in prior practices. It's just a summary of the importance of, with the No Child Left Behind Act and other acts like that happen to talk about the importance of using standards and objective and giving a rubrics for which we want to assess how our students are doing in the classroom. And I know that recently, we talked about this in a prior chapter, they are doing the new science standards, new generation science standards. So I don't know how long this text was, I should have looked it up, how many years ago this text was written, but they are doing that. I think several years ago they started doing the new generation science standards, so they are doing some responses to what this text is talking about. And also, just to sum it up, to ensure that inclusionary research is used in implementing these implementations in our schools. So my takeaways about this, just to sum this up, my aspect, my connection to this text, my takeaways, which is what we're response to. I have several different takeaways. It talks a little bit about individual problems and how individual STEM innovations are not as successful as more wide scale innovations. So I'm just kind of surprised about that, just because I didn't really go into details about why that would be. And because I have my own business, I have a business that's called Shannon Consulting Curriculum and Tutoring, and I've done hours and hours and hours of research on the most effective strategies to use at the ELA level in education. I've written songs and games and skits and all types of activities at the elementary level for reading and writing instruction. And so I'm an individual, and I was able to pull that business idea together and talk about going to school. This is something I just got off the ground. I'm still trying to get off the ground talking about it. That's why I love this, because this is something I can really connect to as far as my business is concerned as an educator, and that's why I'm in this class. One of the reasons why. And so I have some ideas in my business. If you go to my business website, you'll see like some consulting myself going around to different schools in the area, at the local level, and then maybe even larger than that in the future, and talking to, teachers and helping model lessons in the classroom and all that and everything, and working with schools and school districts on helping them using research-based strategies and what my findings are and all that. And so when it talks about individuals, I'm an individual when I was able to come up with that consulting, curriculum, tutoring, my tutoring aspect of my business, and all that and everything, the curriculum, products I've created myself. And so I was kind of surprised, and I would have liked them to get into more details about their rationale for why individual programs are not more, wouldn't be as successful. Though I think they said something about how the scale in which they would be able to implement it at a larger level would be something that you would have to question. And so for I kind of understand it, and I would have to think about some creative ways and how I would be able to do that if it were, something like, if I was chosen for something like this, which would be awesome. And then also talking about pre-K, I said a little bit about pre-K, how they started some type of program. They were comparing pre-K STEM education history compared to pre-K through K through 12, first through 12, or higher elementary level innovations in STEM. And they had some promising findings at the pre-K level. I was surprised about that as well, because as an educator, and I'm an educational consultant, reading specialist, and all that, I understand that at pre-K they're so young, and so they're still learning how to read and write and everything. And I saw that in the last chapter that we read, they're talking about one of the innovations that they're doing was working with the pre-K students and all that and everything, and it sounded great, but I just would be curious to find what it would entail. Like, I would like to see a model of it, because I know that they're still developing their foundational skills, and they're still learning how to read and write. And so I would like to take away and talk about the importance of that at the elementary level. And I talked about this in one of the previous videos I did. The kids are still learning the foundationary principles of reading and writing and math and the basic problem solving and critical thinking skills. So really the innovations and the higher level activities, like, hands-on approaches, although that should happen in combination at the elementary level with the foundational principles, should happen, in my opinion, at more of the middle school and high school level. The elementary level, they need to still be developing those basic skills, although research does show that a combination of different strategies are the most effective. So combining that together, all together, the hands-on and all that and everything, in addition to the foundation, is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. So I would be interested in seeing that pre-K innovation or those like that in place, and how they would do that at that level with those young people. So that was interesting. Little takeaway there. And I'll talk about the points of leadership, finding leaders, get teachers. I was going to say that before. Get teachers, teachers are in the classroom that know what the kids need, like, that are interested in doing things like this, going to graduate school and taking classes like this, and that are interested in doing things like this. Get teachers to start working on these committees, the National Science Panel and the U.S. Department of Education and all that and everything, and get their opinion and get them on these committees and use them to help talk about what's going on, real hands-on problems that they're seeing in the classroom, and suggestions that they have, like what I've already stated. That will also help with making these decisions as well. I'm almost done. And I also talked to the importance of, I suggested, I talked about a little bit about using outside sources, and I think taking kids on field trips and finding funding for field trips to these programs outside the school system that are using these implementations, like more funding for field trips to museums and science centers and things like that. I'm almost done. And then also, I also agreed, we're talking about all these foundations, talking about the importance of using standard-based instruction and objectives to be able to increase accountability in the educational system. Absolutely, I believe in that. I believe it's important that the government and those government entities like the U.S. Department of Education, all that, they should absolutely hold teachers accountable for what they're teaching in the classroom, as long as they don't necessarily talk about a little bit about, we're not teaching to the test, and the students are not getting those critical foundationals, those relationships, and that cooperative learning and all that other hands-on STEM activities that we need, so they can, have a hands-on approach. So it's important to teach the standards and give teachers a rubrics in which to follow and hold them accountable. But as long as we're not overdoing that and teaching the test, because that takes away from the creativity and the time. Talked a little bit about that as well. The time it takes for some of these innovations to take place. It takes time, to do these projects and things like that. So you have to give teachers the training. They talked a little bit about that. and the time to implement it in all the tools and resources that they need to help them be able to bring it to fruition in their classroom, and also talk a little bit about that. So yes, I believe a lot of the things I saw in here in this text, I really agree with, and I'm excited about all that I learned in this text and everything we learned. So hope you like that, and yeah, have a great day.